Recently, I've been on a moral voyage, exploring and questioning my opinions on the moral ethics of euthanasia and medical aid in dying. Something I've never really given much thought, but after watching episode 3 of The Last of Us is all I can think about. Questions swirling in my head. Should death involve autonomy? The potential psychological effects on physicians and doctors aiding in someone's death. Conflicting religious or spiritual beliefs, or the inevitable challenges of regulating such a practice. The first thing we need to understand is that the discourse surrounding this topic is an absolute rabbit hole. There are undoubtedly arguments to be made that stand on factual and statistical evidence, but ultimately the emotionally charged and unprincipled nature of this topic inhibits proper regulation, hence why it is still majority illegal. But not everything has to be so cut and dry. I'm not here today to make a case for or against these practices. I want to disclaim that I'm not an expert. I am not a professional, just someone who likes to ponder. Making this video to simply indulge in the joy of contemplation, to spark questions or gain insight on a complex issue, birthed from the same self-aware mind that will serve as our playground today as we explore euthanasia and the ethics of medical aid in dying. It's first important to understand the difference between euthanasia and medical aid in dying. Euthanasia is a controversial and majority illegal practice which involves a physician administering a lethal amount of barbiturate, a class of sedative hypnotic drugs via injection, optionally followed by a neuromuscular relaxant to induce respiratory arrest. Medical aid in dying, commonly referred to as MAID, is legal in 12 states, known as the End-of-Life Options Act. This procedure is only administered to patients who are terminally ill and given a prognosis of 6 months or less to live. It is also important to note that people eligible for this must be morally sound, capable adults. Patients can request medication, commonly an oral form of barbiturate, that they can self-administer at a time of their choosing. This removes the direct involvement of a physician ending someone's life. It also allows for stricter regulation when deciding who is eligible for this practice. One of the common arguments when it comes to physician-administered euthanasia is that it gives doctors too much power. Doctors should not be able to decide when or why someone dies. While euthanasia requires consent from the patient, the argument is that doctors provide the patients with the information that will ultimately inform their decisions on euthanasia. It is seemingly impossible to rule out the malpractice that could be a consequence of the inability to properly regulate this practice. When I ponder the bioethics of euthanasia, the death penalty comes to mind. The death penalty is legal in 27 states, 3 of which, Colorado, Montana, and California, have also passed the End-of-Life Options Act. If we oversimplify the difference between the two forms of death, it boils down to consent. Why is unconsensual dying illegal in some states, where in many cases the same states have outlawed consensual dying? If you commit a crime bad enough, you get sentenced to a premature death, a form of punishment for one's wrongdoings. Could the opposite argument be made that if a well-adjusted, morally sound person wished to die, we should grant them that? How have we, as a society and government, even convinced ourselves that it's ours to grant in the first place? It's really hard for me to wrap my head around the ethics behind this argument. Humans always have the free will to end their lives. If that's the case, then what's the point of even arguing the legality of assisted death? This, in a lot of ways, paints the argument surrounding euthanasia in a sort of benign tone. I think of similar arguments, such as legalizing prostitution or abortion. The argument being that people are going to do it anyway, so why not make it legal in an attempt to regulate the practices and enforce public safety? Hospice is a common form of palliative care, often offered in assisted living situations for people who are terminally ill. Hospice is a form of care that is administered to patients who have stopped treatment for their illness. MAID is commonly used in hospice care facilities as a way for patients to choose the time of their dying. While MAID still remains controversial, within the context of hospice care, the circumstances become harder to disagree with. Speaking of people disagreeing with medical aid in dying, I wonder if greed and financial corruption plays a part in this conversation. Of course it does. It may come as no surprise, but hospice is an extremely profitable business, with the average revenue being $7,000 per patient. Now, this might get a little controversial, but it would come as no surprise to me if these companies, and even Big Pharma, didn't actively support MAID, as keeping sick people alive, whether they want to be or not, puts dollars in their pockets. While surveys from the National Library of Medicine show that roughly 70% of pharmacists are pro-MAID, it still remains to be largely controversial. This information kind of reads similarly to, well, boys will be boys, so why even bother? The world of bioethics and the endless discourse surrounding MAID and euthanasia is a sort of mortal softlock. People have and will continue to go in loops discussing the controversies surrounding this topic. Some people don't have opinions. Some people have uninformed opinions. Some people have wildly informed opinions. The main consensus that I've kind of come to is that the majority of people arguing this topic aren't on death's door. Lawmakers, medical professionals, governments, people contemplating for the sport of it. But what does the targeted population have to say about this? I imagine that if I was older, and my friend was terminally ill and suffering, and all they wanted was peace and escape from this pain, I would want nothing more than for them to be able to do that and have that. Who does that harm? A human exercising their autonomy in one last act of self-love, gifting themselves the freedom to move on. All this to say, I don't think that there's an easy answer. I don't think that there needs to be. This topic has served as a sort of kaleidoscope into how we value life on Earth. There is little to no discourse surrounding the ethics of veterinary euthanasia, in a lot of cases it being labeled as humane. Would allowing humans at the end of their lives to decide when and where they die also not be humane? I would love to open a respectful discussion in the comments to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on this topic. I leave you with this nugget of an epiphany that I've been brewing on. If death is, then we are not. And if we are, then death is not. So what are we even talking about here?